As some of you know, I started working on my first opening course on Chessable. That will be based on the Slav Defense for black. Personally, an important part of an opening preparation for me is to find a model player that plays your opening in a very instructive way. And I found my guy, I think, folks. He's called Jonny Hector, Swedish grandmaster, a legendary person in Sweden. He also plays in my club in Limhamn, in Malmö. Jonny Hector is a very dynamic and attacking player, and yet he took the Slav defense with black, and he employed it for almost his entire career with great success. He's the guy who shows us the dynamic nature of the Slav defense, because some people think Slav is boring, black is playing for solid structures, very uninteresting, not sharp at all, going for solidity and safety. No, Jonny Hector proved us wrong. His dynamical treatment of the Slav defense, his energetic approach to Slav has changed my mind when it comes to how I'm thinking about the Slav defense, folks. Today, I will show you two Jonny Hector games. One is very positional and strategic. The other one is very sharp and dynamic, to show you his style, but also show you different treatments and different ways to handle and employ this great opening with the black pieces. Are you ready, folks? In the key moments, I will stop and ask you to think like Jonny Hector, guess the moves of the grandmaster. There are so many instructive nuggets in this video session, folks. Let's kick off the first game, Cifuentes versus Jonny Hector, 1992. And Slav defense is obviously the move c6 from black. What's the basic point? Well, you don't want to kill your bishop by playing e6, right? e6 is queen's gambit declined. That's, of course, also respectable opening for black. But Slav wants to preserve the central pawn on d5 and yet keeps the options for the bishop open on this diagonal. Very logical and principled indeed. Knight f6, black develops their kingside knight. e3, there are different ways for white to play, of course. I made a video about this. It's called Slav Defense for Newbies. Post a link in this video description, folks. But here, he's going for the slow Slav. He is defending his pawn with the bishop. The drawback is this bishop is a little bit sad on c1 in this position. And of course, Jonny Hector takes the first opportunity and gets the bishop outside of the pawn chain before playing e6. This is the spirit of this classical Slav defense, folks. You don't want to play e6 here. You really want to get the bishop outside of the chain and achieve some sort of a reverse London formation with the black pieces. Very solid and principled indeed. CD, queen b3. That's the usual treatment for white against early bishop f5s. Usually, early queen b3s is an ambitious approach for white. We have several different ways to handle this, but this must be known by heart for black when it comes to opening preparation and memorization. What's the point of queen b3? Very typical and logical. The bishop moved from c8, thus the queen puts pressure on the pawn on b7. Generally, we never want to play moves like b6 against queen b3, folks. Why? Because you're weakening the entire diagonal, you're weakening some key squares, you're inviting moves like bishop b5, check, knight c3s, you're wasting time in the opening with this move. You generally want to avoid such moves. Queen b6 should also be avoided in those positions because you just gave white this beautiful b5 outpost, and your, let's say, activation of the f-file is not worth it. Black has no enough compensation for this structural long-term deficit, plus even the b6 pawn is a long-term target for white. White has a better position of the knight c3s. Okay? So, Jonny Hector doesn't play b6, doesn't play queen b6, but queen c7. Queen c7 guards the pawn, but also attacks the bishop, right? That's a tempo gaining move and the best move for black in this position. Bishop d2 was chosen in the actual game, folks. Knight c3, e6, black is very solid and safe in this position because the bishop remains to be locked inside the chain. Bishop d2 was chosen in the actual game. e6, of course, we want to continue developing our pieces, right? Bishop b5 check, knight c6. This is also the point of black's setup. This knight is nicely covering against this diagonal. It's a very safe piece. And black simply wants to develop their army, castle short, and take it from there. Bishop b4. So in order to get something from the opening, white tries to disturb black from naturally making those moves. Bishop b4, use the fact that the knight is pinned. So if you take that bishop direct, which is also, by the way, a very good move, queen takes b4 is the point of white, and the knight is pinned, and the queen is sort of stopping the black king from castling short in his position. Instead of taking the bishop directly, Jonny Hector plays the move bishop d6. A very logical move indeed. The basic point is that if you take my bishop, queen takes d6, castle short, and black is fine in this. So after bishop d6, white plays the move queen a3. They really want to, let's say, force black in taking the bishop on b4, and the basic point is that the queen is stopping the black king from castling short. Having said this, there's no danger for black whatsoever, given white's lack of development in this position. Okay, but Jonny Hector plays the move knight e4, very strong and standard move. The knight assumes beautiful central post, plus guarding the bishop on d6 in this position. Knight e2, and here Jonny Hector simply castles short and finishes off the development. Here, the white player took the knight on c6, queen takes c6, and then they castled short in this position, folks. They castle short, and here we are coming to a critical segment. Takes a5 to chase the queen away, and then this transformation first, and then we end up in a critical moment. The entire game is so positional and strategic, and it's so beautiful. And it all revolves around one key positional factor. Maybe you can already stop here and tell me the plan for black. Which plan is the best for black in this position, folks? Yes, there's only a single open file, that's a C file. So you start fighting for the C file, and the move is rook fc8. This rook is joining the queenside play, occupying the only open file, because this rook is still guarding the pawn on a5, so you bring all your pieces to the queenside. Their main action takes place. Indeed, that's a very typical Slav chunk. Usually at some point, right, after c takes d5 in the Slav structures, there's only an open file in the position, the C file, and the entire strategic fight becomes this occupation of the open file. Thus, rook c8 is the best move. What's the basic point? If you play rook c1, I simply grab your rook on c1, and this is a completely lost position for white, because, well, after this, b5, b4 is coming, or rook c8 are coming, followed up with bishop d3s. This knight is pinned. White is in dire trouble in this position, folks. For example, f3, b4, well, the queen has to move in this position. Bishop c2s are here. Even the queen can get trapped in this position, folks. This game is completely finished. Black is winning. So, rook c8 is a beautiful move. White cannot challenge the open file in this position. So they play the move knight f3. The knight wants to come to e5, but it's not going to be a dangerous piece for black to deal with. And here, Jonny Hector plays a very strong move as well. First of all, f6 was also good. Congratulations. If you simply want to dominate that knight on f3, that's also a great move for black. Look at the effect of the pawn on f6 on the knight on f3. That's a terrible piece for white, but the bishop is serving a function on this diagonal in its position. Okay? b5, b4 is coming next, and black is having a very good game. In the actual game, Jonny Hector played directly the move b5 to chase away the queen with the move b4 in his position. Knight e5 hits the queen, queen drops back to c7. Notice, he's still stopping rook c1. That's the entire strategic fight that is going on in this position, folks. Black is simply better. b3 to rescue the queen, but then comes b4. Here, the queen has two choices, let's say, in this position. They chose queen b2. If queen goes to a4, folks, the queen itself is running short of squares, and black is a very nice way to exploit that. First, you chase that strong knight on e5. The knight is becoming a terrible piece. Plus, how can the queen be attacked by the black bishop in this position? And you're a great player if you found the plan of bishop g6 and bishop b8. White, again, is in dire trouble. Queen b5 is the only way to rescue the queen. But then after queen e2 comes one more beautiful moment here, folks. Please, black to play and take over the game strategically. As Dinzovich said, once you occupy the open file, you invade the 7th or the 2nd rank, and you're a great player if you found the move queen c2, folks. Well, you offer a trade of the queens, and then after takes, you occupy the only open file. Complete domination for black. White also has back rank problems. Black is completely winning in this position. That knight's also terrible. The bishop can improve further in this position. It's already disastrous position for white. That's why after b4 they go queen b2. The queen is quite poorly placed in this position, and first he chases away the knight on e5. After rook c1 he goes queen b7. Again, he's keeping an eye on the rook on c8, and after the knight moves we end up in another very instructive moment here, folks. Please stop the video and formulate a good plan for black. The prompt is this: you have to keep fighting for the only open file in this position. And there's one move that simply fights for this open file, and black wants to intensify the pressure on the open file. Please take a moment, stop and find that beautiful move for black here, folks. You're a great player if you found Jonny Hector's move, rook a6. What a beautiful Karpovian move this is. The whole point is this: the rook simply wants to come to c6 and fight for the open file. Only open file in this position. What's the entire point? If you take my rook, after takes back, rook c1, looks like white is the one who is taking over the file. Here comes the secondary point of rook a6. You go rook c6 and you keep challenging the only open file. You pressurize that rook on c1, and after takes, they have to, after queen takes c6, again, black is the one who is occupying the open c file with a long-lasting advantage. White cannot repel the queen from c6. Queen has further ideas like going to c3 at some point and creating a very dangerous pass pawn on c3, not to mention other ideas like this, queen b5 check, for example, after king e1, invasions like queen d3, right? You see the point. Black has great piece activity, and this is giving them a long-lasting advantage in this position. So, rook a6, classy, right? A very classy strategic move. In this position, he goes a3. The point is, he wants to activate the rook on a1. The issue is black can simply wait for white to take on b4 and replace that pawn on b4. Meanwhile, the pawn on b3 also became weak as a result. That will be relevant at some point, folks. Please keep that in mind. Black to play. How do you intensify your pressure on the c file? Yes, he goes rook c6 and fights for the open file. Takes, 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 takes. Right? After rook c1, what is the right move for black in this position, folks? You can do it. How do you keep fighting for the open file? That's a beautiful, beautiful game, folks. Of course, queen c8 or queen c7. You want to pressurize the rook and you want to exchange on your own terms in this position with black. So he goes queen c8. He says, give me the open file. Give it to me, baby. Okay? Takes, takes. Here, please take a stock. Black is the one who is simply better, because now, on top of your open file advantage, you can even go queen c3 at some point to pressurize the weak pawn on b3 and exchange on your own terms in getting a beautiful pass pawn on c3. h3. White needs to solve their back rank problem, folks. But the best move, maybe the only move for white to fight in this position, was queen a1. White needed to activate the queen as soon as possible. Well, after h6, let's say to create a loop for the king, they need to go back with the knight. They need to stop those key squares for black to invade the white's position. It's a very difficult position to defend for white, even after queen c3. If you grab my queen, then I'm winning that endgame, so queen d1 is the only move. This was the only sequence of moves for white, maybe to hold this position, and even here, black is the one who is having an advantage, because white is totally paralyzed in guarding their weaknesses here. See, white misses the only way to fight in this position. They go h3, and now it's your turn, folks. Black to play. Which move did Jonny Hector play in this position to prove the strength of the open file? Yes, queen c3. Exchange is used as a weapon. That's another beautiful part about this game. Exchange offer for black. If you grab my queen, this pawn becomes unstoppable. You see, white has no way to stop that pawn. You need to basically just sacrifice your knight, and black is competitive in this position. So after queen c3, white is in dire trouble, because, I mean, the pawn is hanging. Queen b1 doesn't work because of the bishop. Queen a2 was chosen in the actual game, but even this will lead to a much, much better position for black. Again, queen c1 check. It's your turn, folks. This queen wants to activate in this position. How do you force a beautiful exchange and achieve a winning position? And you're a great player if you found Jonny Hector's move, queen a3. Amazing, right? Exchange the weapon. If you take my queen, then this outside pass pawn decides the knight cannot fight against that pass pawn. Otherwise, my queen is pressing your pawn, and there's no way for the white queen to move and also guard that pawn on b1. Now you see the function of that bishop on f5 as well, right, folks? Beautiful harmony. White is losing an important pawn. Black is achieving an amazing pass pawn, and this game is totally finished. I will show you how the actual game ended until the very end. Bishop e4 also activates the bishop. The pawn is running. The black king is so safe after king h7 because, again, look at the function of that bishop, stopping all kind of checks. And now that pawn is simply running. White tried knight h4, maybe to get the knight to f5 and so on. But after b3, they have no counterplay whatsoever. Jonny Hector played b2 after takes. There are no more checks left. White resigned because I will promote to a queen on the next turn. Black is completely winning in his position. Let's say after takes. The knight cannot stop my pawn. It's game over. For me, this was the most critical and instructive segment about this game. There's only a single open file. The fight is for this open C file. And see how the Grandmaster is forming a beautiful plan. Well, the point is this. I will occupy the open file. I will exchange on my own terms. And if you grab my rook in this position, then you don't solve your problems, right? Rook c6 is coming anyway. This is what I mean by long-lasting strategic pull for black in those Slav structures. Very typical and recurrent Slav chunk for you, Slav players. In the actual game, also look how he continued fighting for the open file with queen c8. He says, give me the file, and now black is the one who is holding all kind of cards, right? Queen c3 ideas are there, invasions on the second rank, and so on and so on. And white couldn't find the only resource, maybe queen a1, even after queen a1, right? Black is the one who is pressing. It's a pressing position for white, folks. And here, queen c3, please exchange those queens and give me the pass pawn. Again, queen a3, please exchange those queens and give me a pass pawn. Beautiful, right? I love those strategic games, strategic battles. That really speaks to my heart, folks. And I think I'm very hopeful about the Slav course because I'll be showing you those recurrent strategic segments and ideas for black. This first game might give you an impression that Jonny Hector is a very Karpovian player, strategic, solid, positional. And yes, he's a grandmaster. He has lots of tools in his disposal. But deep inside, he's a very attacking and dynamic player, sacrificing pawns for piece activity. And I will show you his game against Jan Timman in Pepe Sigaman tournament in Malmö in 2007. Jan Timman is a legend from the Netherlands. He was world number 3 at some point in the 80s, if I'm not wrong. He's an absolute legendary player, very strong player. Jan Timman with the white pieces, Jonny Hector with black. I will show you how he beat him in this game with the black pieces. Are you ready to see a violent Slav game here, folks? What do you think Jonny Hector played in this position with the black pieces? As I told you, Slav can go really sharp here, folks. Jonny Hector plays the move e5 in this position, folks. This is called the Wiener counter-gambit. It resembles Albin counter-gambit. Maybe some of you know the Albin counter-gambit, folks, right? Black goes e5. That's the Albin counter-gambit against the Queen's Gambit. The basic point is to get this pawn to d4 to stop white from naturally developing their pieces and so on and so on. And here, Jonny Hector shows us different ways to handle the Slav. He knows Jan Timman is a very strategic player at heart. Maybe he wants to also murky the voters as soon as possible. You see, very close to Albin counter-gambit. The pawn reaches d4 to disturb that knight on c3. Knight e4 was chosen by Jan Timman in the actual game. Queen a5 check, looks at the pawn on e5. After knight e2, black doesn't take the pawn because that will lose black even more time if you grab that pawn with the queen. Instead, Jonny Hector plays knight e7. He wants to grab the pawn with a knight. Black wants to develop their pieces earlier than the white's kingside pieces. That's the basic claim and philosophy of black's entire gambit in this position. Well, knight f3 was maybe better, but e6 is also a logical move. They want to break black's pawn structure and then continue with knight f3. If you take that pawn, the bishop is also blunted if you take that pawn with the pawn on f7. But in the actual game, Jonny Hector refuses the pawn and he plays the move knight e5. Spirit of Jonny Hector, right? Dynamical player. Now black sacrificed one full pawn in this position. He accepts there will be down a pawn in the entire game most likely, but his claim is his pieces are going to be shining over the white pieces. Please look at the white's army, folks. They are still sleeping here. And black is already starting developing their pieces one by one. Again, with best play, white is the one who is better. For example, in this position, the best move was knight f3, which wasn't played by young Timman in the actual game. The point is, if you take my pawn, because the knight is pinned on d2, queen b3 is a very powerful move, right? Pinning that knight, bishop b7 fails because of queen takes b7 check, right? Queen b3 was a very powerful resource, folks. If you have to play the move b5, then I can simply play knight e5 and grab your pawn, or maybe even g3, bishop g2 and castle short. White is the one who is winning in this position, folks. After knight f3, black couldn't take on c4, but of course, if you take that knight, after he takes f3, the bishop is coming to d3, castle short, white is again better in this position. But in the actual game, Jan Timman played a very logical move g3. He wants to simply develop their king side, maybe flank the bishop, maybe play bishop h3 to exchange on some pieces, and then claim that he is the extra pawn in this position. But Jonny Hector continues playing very dynamically in this position, folks. He plays a developing move, knight f6. Very logical. Bishop h3 by Jan Timman. Again, white is an extra pawn. White wants to exchange some pieces in this position. Here, Jonny Hector plays bishop b4. What can be more natural? The bishop is developed to b4, also pinning that knight. If you play a3, this is no threat because the rook will be hanging on a1 in this position, right? White cannot even ask a question directly to the bishop on b4. King f1 was chosen by Timman, unpinning their knight. Sometimes the king can find safe shelter on g2. Maybe an okay move for white as well. But see, Jonny Hector keeps on developing his pieces one by one. He's not in a hurry to get the pawn back in his position. And again, Stockfish might say white is slightly, tiny bit better in his position, but practically it's a whole different story. Please observe those two white pieces. They will never find life in the entire game for white. Knight b3 by Jan Timman. Hitting the queen, queen a6 is powerful. Simply putting pressure on the pawn on c4, folks. Knight takes d4, bishop takes h3 check, knight takes h3, and rook d8. Even here, he doesn't take the pawn on c4. He's bringing the final guy into the picture. Isn't it beautiful? Look, black is playing very, very natural chess, developing moves after developing moves. He's just given up 2 pawns to reach this position, but he's counting on his piece activity. That gives him enough compensation. In fact, black is the one who is having an advantageous position here, folks. Because if you play e3, then I can play c5, and your pin knight will be dropping on the next turn. So, rook d8, developing move, coming up with a threat as well. Very powerful. Well, queen b3 was the only move in this position for white, and he chose the move queen b3, unpins the knight, and counterattacks the loose bishop on b4. And see how Jonny Hector played. He took the knight first, and then he grabbed the first pawn on c4. But it's not like a random pawn, because this also activates my rook. Even my queen becomes happy. Not to mention ideas like rook d1 comes into play in this position, folks. Moreover, now this alignment occurs, and the threat is simply to discover check in this position and picking up the queen on b4. Thus, Timman played the move queen b3. The queen is pinning that knight again, but knight is already a very secure piece on c4. So, a very simple move, king f8. He's simply tucking his king on f8 in this position and unpinning the knight. Also avoiding knight g5 checks and so on. Knight f4 by Jan Timman. He needs to activate that piece. The problem is this knight is harmless on this f4 square. Sometimes knight can go back to d3 and defend some key squares. Yes, but the basic problem for white is the bishop. Now the bishop is hindered in his position. If that's the case, then even this rook is sleeping on a1. White's main problem, folks, is their lack of development, and that will go on to hurt white eventually in his position. If bishop g5 in this position, folks, then I can even take on e2 because of this alignment on this diagonal. If you take my rook, then comes knight e2, discover check, followed by knight takes b3, and the game is over. So that's why he plays knight f4. He's defending the pawn on e2 with his knights. And Jonny Hector here plays the move c5. Very logical. Also paving way for the queen to reach c6 and pressurize that diagonal, also defending the rook on d4 as well. g5 was also very powerful here, folks. If you thought about g5, it was also a very good move. Knight d3, queen a5 comes to mind, with some ideas like queen d5 in this position. Black is the one again who is simply better in this position because of their piece activity in this position. The bishop is also quite a poor piece. But he plays the move c5, queen c2 was the game continuation in this position. Sometimes the idea is to play b3, maybe bishop b2 if white is all the time in the world. Of course, they would like to make all these moves. The issue is black is not giving them so much time to execute those ideas. Queen c6 simply hits the rook on h1, and already here, Timman on move 20, pressurized by black's activity, makes a vital mistake. He goes rook g1, folks. Rook g1 is a game-losing mistake. I will show you why. Maybe the only move was king g1, but even after king g1, you see, the rook becomes a terrible piece, and black has several ways to intensify their pressure. Knight d5 attacks that knight on f4 as well, sometimes knight b4 ideas. If you take my knight, it's already a game over position because of rook d1 ideas. Bishop f4 gets the bishop out. The issue is g5 is so powerful. The bishop has no natural squares in this position, folks. Please look at this. The bishop on f4 is lacking a natural square here. If you take on g5, I just take your bishop, and black is so much better. Otherwise, if the bishop drops back, comes rook d1 check, and the king has no escape. This is already game over. You see, black's piece activity is already causing white so much problems. If you go bishop c7 here, rook e7 attacks your bishop. After bishop b8, rook d2 is coming. It's already disastrous position. Black is winning. After queen c6, maybe even f3 was okay for black, right? To pay this threat on the rook. Well, the problem with f3 is that g5, g4s are allowed. Black can break this pawn chain by playing g5, g4, but white is just in the game after g4, maybe king f2, right? They are guarding the pawn on f3 this way. Maybe white can survive with best play, but even after knight d5, folks, it's understandable. Black has great pieces that give them enough compensation, more than enough compensation for the pawn. Rook g1, this rook's fate will be disastrous for the entire game, folks. Please watch how terrible that rook on g1 has become for the rest of the game. First, Jonny Hector, black to play, folks. Please stop the video and find a great move for black in this position. Black played a beautiful attacking game from this position. Really shows us his style as a player as well. First of all, folks, congratulations, you found the move knight g4. That's the only winning move for black. The first idea is knight h2 check, but also there are several ideas about this move. Sometimes even ideas like knight e3 comes into play in this position, folks. Okay, rook g2 guarded the pawn on h2, but that rook is becoming a terrible fianchetto rook. Fianchetto rooks in chess are usually terrible, just like fianchetto knights, and this game also shows us the dangers of placing your rooks in those squares. Even the rook is cutting off the king's escape route via g2. Now back rank problems start to re-emerge in the white's position. See, by simply putting pressure on those weaknesses, black is paralyzed that rook on g2, and this will cause a defeat. Well, this queen is now the main guard of the square d1. Rook d1 could be checkmate if not for the queen on c2. So Jonny Hector uses this fact and finds another beautiful move, forward move in this position. And you're a great player again if you want to move queen e4. A beautiful queen centralization here, folks. Piece activity. Beautiful. If you take my queen, then comes checkmate. Again, please look at the clumsy fianchetto rook on g2. Look at white's lack of development in causing demise for white. Beautiful, right? Queen e4. What a beautiful move to make. The queen is centralized, putting pressure on the loose queen on c2, hitting here as well, keeping an eye on the rook on g2. It's already disastrous position for white. White has no defense. Knight e3 may be the only move for white in this position. But their problems remain. Now the f-file has been opened up after the move knight e3. And black finds another beautiful move to simply puts pressure here, also pins that pawn and anticipates those knight e3 ideas here, folks. And you're a great player again if you found the move queen f5. Maybe again, the only winning move for black. The queen starts showing her teeth. Now the basic point is knight e3 check, the pawn is pinned, and I will pick up your queen on the next turn, right? White needs to react to this move. Meanwhile, the knight is pinned because of the loose queen on c2 as well. The queen is an amazing piece on f5. Queen c3 is the game continuation. What would black play if white played the move king g1, folks? It's black to play and win. Beautiful tactical exercise. You can do it. Please stop the video and find the winning move for black in this position. Look at this, folks. The fianchetto rook is choking the king. White has backrank problems. This rook could reach e1 if you create the conditions. And you're a great player if you want the move queen takes d3. Bam! What a beautiful queen sacrifice. If you take my queen, then rook e1. Isn't it like a picturesque checkmate, folks? You don't even need the knight. Just look at the rook on g2 and look at the king on g1. And look at the rook on a1 and the bishop on c1. That's the story of this entire game. Beautiful. Queen takes d3, queen takes d3, rook takes d3, and black is still winning because black has so much extra material, extra piece. The game is completely finished. That's why after queen f5, Timman played the move queen c3 in this position, folks. He's, let's say, guarding some of those key squares on the back rank. The issue is, well, the pawn is pinned in this position, so black goes ahead and plays the move knight e3, right? This was one of the basic points of the move knight g4 anyhow, and now you're giving me material in this position. The pawn is pinned. If you take with the bishop, then knight e3 is coming. Well, nothing changes. I can still take on g2, having much better position. Rook takes e2, knight's attacked as well. The pawn is also attacked on f2. It's already disastrous position. Black is winning. Yes. So after knight e3, Timman played the move king g1. And unfortunately, I mean, look at the position, folks. Picturesque, right? A picturesque position. The rook on g2 is trapped. The rook on g2 is trapped. In some sense, you don't even want to take that rook, right? The rook is doing nothing on g2. In the actual game, Hector played the move knight g2. That's also winning, by the way. But knight d1 was a much cuter solution, folks. Hitting the queen and simply pressurizing the pawn on e2, also activating the rook on the file. If queen c2 comes, you tell me, bam, the same idea. Queen takes d3, and this will be a cute little mate. Don't you think, folks? It's a shame that Hector didn't play the move knight d1 here, folks. This will be a Kasparovian move, and this will also finish off the task because queen d3, queen b3, nothing changes. I still take on d3, disastrous, yeah? Like, there's nothing to calculate. The game is already over in this position. In the actual game, Jonny Hector took the rook on g2. Black is still winning after the rook takes e2. The knight is hit. The pawn is also loose, and this game is finished. Knight f4, queen e4 check. Well, queen f3. The rest is easy. Black simply exchange the queens and pin the bishop, and Timman resigned because black has one full extra exchange plus amazing pieces. You have still developmental problems, and black won the game easily. Timman resigned. There are no counter tricks because my rook covers e6. This is just totally game over position. Amazing player, right? Amazing dynamism. Shows us all the cards, all the tricks in this boring looking opening called the Slav Defense. He goes for whenever counter gambit. He places the pawn on d4. He takes Timman outside of his comfort zone, right? He murky the waters as soon as possible. He goes for piece activity. He sacrifices the pawn for dynamism, and he is rewarded in the end, right? Already here, by the way, objectively, black is very close to full equality. It's not easy at all for white to prove the extra pawn in this position, folks. Now it's also very easy to understand, right? After rook d8, you come to this position, you just look at it. Well, white has two extra pawns, but look at black's dynamism and harmony and coordination, right? And look at your pieces. Never forget, the bishop and the rook never made a single move for the entire game, folks. It's very unheard of for a player like Timman. He was number 3 in the world at some point to lose a game like this. Once again, the beautiful move, queen e4, star move, centralizing the queen, highlighting the background problems and the fianchetto and clumsy rook on g2, and even those ideas of queen takes d3 in this position, highlighting the background problem and those checkmate ideas. Picturesque game, folks. So as a conclusion, I think Jonny Hector is a great guy for Slav players to check his games. He also played in many open tournaments for his entire life, which means he played very instructive games against lower rated players, slightly lower rated players. I think those games are very instructive. When a grandmaster outplays a slightly lower level position, there are so many nice lessons in those games because the grandmaster uses vision patterns to outplay a slightly lower rated player. That's the second reason why Jonny Hector can be a great model player for those Slav players. I got excited when I saw his games. In the course, there'll be a separate chapter on model games, which features so many Jonny Hector games. Slav is a good opening, both principled, strategic, and can be dynamic like crazy, as this game has shown us. Please let me know if you also know some amazingly beautiful games in a Slav. Just send it my way, and I will consider annotating them and putting them in my model games chapter on the Slav Defense. If you like the video, folks, please give me a like and subscribe and share this channel with a person which you think would benefit from its content, so I can keep on producing content that actually helps you get better in this beautiful game. Bye-bye.